Spinning seams helps your seams lay flat where they join, particularly when you've got bulky blocks like half square triangles where you've got lots of fabric coming together. But how do you spin your seams? Well, that's what I'm covering in this video. So I'm going to cover a very simple 4-patch block to show you the concept. Then we're going to move on to a half square triangle block with a pinwheel, and then I'm going to go on to a couple of flying geese blocks to show you how those join together. So who am I? I am Kim. This is Quilt with Kim. You, my lovely, are very, very welcome. Let's go work on the very first block then, which is this 4-patch block. I have joined this together. I am not going to show you how to stitch all the little blocks together that I'm going to show you, otherwise this will be a very long video. But if you check out the description below, I've put all the links in there for the blocks I'm going to show you so you can find out how to make those. And I've also linked up the video about how to nest your seams and match your seams, because those will be terms I will refer to as well. So let's get on with this. Now I've joined this 4-patch together, and what I've got here is 2 stitch lines. I'm going to bring this up to camera so you can see. Now I've stitched this in different colored threads so you can see which one is which. So this red thread stitch line down here is the first stitch line that I would have used to join these 2 patches together, these 2 pieces, to form 1/2 of my block. Okay, so that would have joined those 2. And again, on the other side, I've got another red stitch line on the back joining that bottom half there. So the red stitch line is my first stitch line. When we have joined these 2 pieces together, we then have to match the seams. We have to nest the seam in the middle, and we have to match that seam so we have a nice little beautiful point in the middle there. And then we're stitching across, and this is what I have used my white stitch line to show you. So this is the second stitch line that we do to create our 4-patch block. Okay, so this is our red stitch line, that's the first stitch line, and the white is our second stitch line. Now can you see here in the seam allowance, let's get this in the middle of the screen, in the seam allowance you can see that this first stitch line, the red stitch line, goes right to the end. That's where we've joined those pieces together, and then the white stitch line, the second stitch line, crosses it. So we have a little area up here that's the part that gets a bit bulky. Now what we're doing when we're spinning our seams is we're carefully unpicking this little first stitch line just to the point of that white stitch line there, our second stitch line. It does not come undone because that white stitch line crosses it. The second stitch line crosses it. And when we are doing patchwork, we have a stitch length of generally 1.8 or 2. So that is small enough to fix that first stitch line into position. So if I very carefully unpick this, which is surprisingly very difficult this far away with my glasses on, but we'll endeavour and we'll carry on. So can you see I've unpicked that? If I hold that right up to the camera there so that you can see, I've unpicked it, and there's probably just 1 stitch left just at the end of my seam ripper there. So there's the little tail, so I'm going to leave that tail in place, and there is 1 stitch just there, and then that's my second stitch line, that white stitch line that's crossing it, and then this red stitch line continues down there. This won't come undone because that white stitch line crosses it. So I've done that side. I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to do the second side. I have no idea what all the shenanigans is going on over here. I left this alone for about 3 seconds and it's got thread all caught up. Right, let's sort that out. So over here on this second side, I'm going to unpick my first stitch line. That's the red stitch line in this situation, or this scenario, or this example, whatever the word is. I'm going to unpick that very carefully, which I really can't see. I'm trying to do this in real time for you, so I don't just take it away and bring it back. Let's try and get in the seam to show you. Let's get in there. That might be a bit easier to see from up on high. There we go. Okay, that will be a lot easier when you're close up. And I've got one more stitch that I could probably undo just there. Okay, so can you see again, sorry that's coming off the bottom of the screen, I've unstitched that, so there's one stitch left at the bottom. I just need to make sure that there is one stitch left. And then we've got that second stitch line crossing it. So again, it will not come undone, I promise, because this second stitch line keeps it in place, keeps that first stitch line in place. And then what we're going to do, having opened up that little seam there, what you'll find is that you'll be able to just fold that back. Okay, so as you fold it back, it is held against that second stitch line. Okay, now having done the unpicking, I'm going to put it down on the desk or on the cutting mat to show you the next part. Let's open it up. Okay, so if you have a look at these seams, as I open it up, whoops, pressing the wrong side. If I open it up, you can see that we've got a little checkerboard effect in the center there. And you can see now we've got this spinning seam effect. And when we've got this checkerboard effect, you'll feel that that seam, that bulk in the middle is a lot less. So in reality, with a 4-patch, I wouldn't spin my seams because generally they're not that bulky, but you can absolutely go for it if you want to. If you are joining lots of 4-patch blocks together or lots of other blocks, you would do exactly the same thing at all the seam joins all the way along. Okay, but you will feel straight away that that is a lot flatter than how it normally would be when it's folded over to one side. You can immediately feel the difference. So it's this little checkerboard effect is what you're after. Obviously you wouldn't have the red and white thread. The red stitch line was my first stitch lines to join the two halves, and then the white is my second stitch line, which stays in place and that holds those original stitches in place. So don't worry about it coming apart. The other thing, whilst I'm just on that subject before I move on to the half square triangles, is that when you have layered this into a quilt and then you start quilting it, your quilting will also hold these layers together. That's what it's actually designed to do, because a 1/4 inch seam isn't big enough to cope with the rigors of everyday life, really. That's one of the reasons why we have the quilting. So don't worry about this seam coming undone, it will be fine. Okay, leave that little tail in place that we had, this little thread when we unpicked, and just leave one little stitch above your white stitch line, your second stitch line. Right, having covered that, let's get on to the half square triangles in my pinwheel. Let's have a quick look at this pinwheel then, because this is constructed, as you probably know, by stitching a couple of squares together, and we cut them in half to make our half square triangle blocks, and then we join 4 half square triangle blocks together to make this pinwheel effect. And when you get into the middle, it feels really bulky because there is a lot of fabric going on at the back here. So let me show you how to spin the seams on this one. And again, I've got some multicolored thread to tell us what's what. First of all, the red stitch line, just like on my 4-patch, that is my first stitch line when I joined the 2 squares together to ultimately make my half square triangle block. So that is my first stitch line, and you'll see that comes right into the seam allowance here. Then when I've made my half square triangle blocks, I then have to join 2 of them together to make 1/2 of my pinwheel block. So that would be those 2 or those 2. So my second stitch line is my lime green stitch line here, and again you can see that goes all the way up into the seam allowance right up at the top there. Okay, I'm trying to navigate by looking into the screen that I'm seeing what I'm recording, and it's not quite working very well. So you can see the red stitch line, the first stitch line comes into the seam allowance, and then the yellow or the lime stitch line also goes into the seam allowance, and then they are held in place by when we join the two halves of that block together, and that's my orange stitch line going across horizontally there. So the orange stitch line stays exactly in place, but it is the red and the lime that we're trying to get rid of. So the first stitch line and the second stitch line we are unpicking. Just as we did on the 4 patch, we are unpicking that very carefully just to my orange, my third stitch line, but not quite there. So let's do that. Let's move it a little bit closer. And I'm just going to duck and see if I can get in there. It's like doing a fine operation on camera, this, because I can't actually see. I need those glasses. In fact, I have got those glasses that magnify everything from a distance. Maybe I ought to do that. That kicked up a fuss, didn't it? I'll get at that in a minute. Right, let's take the lime out. That comes out a bit easier. Just make sure you can see and it's not coming off the edge. Okay, let's get in here and undo anything else. Oops, let's fold that back. Okay, that's all coming apart very nicely. Just bear with. If you've followed me for a little while, you'll know that I do actually like to do things in real time. And I also don't hide when things go wrong, because I think it creates a bit of a false illusion when you see people on YouTube and they go, oh, look at this, it just happened just like that and it's all perfect. It doesn't happen like that in real life at all, because we all know that fabric and thread is actually alive and it doesn't do as it's told. So that's one side. So the lime stitch, that's my second stitch line, I've unpicked, and you can see it's just before my orange stitch line, so that's my third stitch line. And again, the red, which is my initial first stitch line, that's unpicked and it's just before, I'm holding that right up so you can see, just before that orange stitch line. So it's still in the seam allowance. God, look at the fray on that fabric. I haven't been doing much with this either. I just literally stitched it up a couple of hours ago to show you. Okay, so really close up, you can see that there's one stitch left there between the tail of the red and the orange stitch line, and again the same with the lime, there's one stitch between the tail of the lime and the orange stitch line. Okay, so that's there, and now we're going to turn it over and we're going to do exactly the same on the other side. So let me get in there to get in. Okay, that's come out a little bit easier than the other side. Okay, one more stitch to go. Okay, and so that's the red, and let's just unpick the lime. So that's my second stitch line, is the lime, where I've joined the two halves together. Okay, I think we're there. Maybe just one more. Okay, there we go. So we've got the same again on this side. So the red, that first stitch line has been unpicked in the seam allowance, and then the lime has been unpicked. So that was our second stitch line, that's been unpicked in the seam allowance. So again, my orange stitch line, that was the third stitch line I used to join the two halves of my pinwheel together. That is crossing my red stitch line, my first stitch line, and the second stitch line, which is the lime stitch line. It's crossing both of those and holding it in place. And again, I've got a nice tight stitch length, so it will hold those in place. And again, when we have put it in place, we've layered it and we've quilted it, everything will hold into place. So do not worry about this coming apart. It will be fine, I promise. So having done that, we're going to put it down on the cutting mat as before. right side down. Let's turn this around so you can see, and it still looks a bit bulky here, doesn't it? But don't fear, because now what we are going to do is carefully get in this seam, and as we open it up at the back, we can then create a little mini pinwheel just at the back there. What I can feel is that it is flat, and that's what we're after. So I'm pushing these seams to opposite sides, so you can see these seams going round in a bit of a wheel, and this section in the middle will feel nice and flat. So where the fabric wants to go, you end up with this nice little section here in the middle where all the seams are now spinning round, and you get a flat section, and hopefully your fabric is not going to fray. So shall we see how the flying goose fabric fares? The same thing again. I've made the little flying geese, so let's close that up, and I've got color coding yet again, where I've got my red stitches at the first stitch line that I made when I made my flying goose. So you can see that they go into the seam allowance, making a little V shape at the top there. And then the lime green made a reappearance, and that's my second stitch line when it joined the two flying geese blocks together. And if I turn it round, you can see that there's the lime green stitch line on the back there where we have joined the two blocks together. So we do it exactly the same thing, and what we're going to do is unpick that first stitch line, or the first stitch line, the two first stitch lines, the two red little V shape lines here, and we're going to unpick those just next to the second stitch line. Leave your tail in place, unpick that and unpick that, and as we open this, we'll see the blue in my bit of the top goose, or the bottom goose rather, that wants to come towards this goose, and then these little pink bits here of the sky in the top goose, they can separate out, and that'll flatten that center seam there. So let me just show you up above. It's not sitting very flat. Let's try and get that under the camera, so you end up with a little back that looks like that. Again, if it doesn't look pretty, don't worry too much about it, because it will be hidden, but what you'll feel is that that lays flat. And if I turn it round from the right side, immediately that bulk has gone on from the right side of our flying goose blocks. So I hope that has given you some confidence in spinning your seams. What you're aiming for is the flat seam without the bulk. If it doesn't look completely pretty like it does in the books and things, don't worry about it. It'll be hidden within the layers of your quilt. What you are aiming for is to get rid of the bulk so that you can stitch over it when you're doing your quilting, and that is the aim of spinning your seams. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that notification bell. I will love you and leave you for now, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.